Hello and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and an actor or two as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And today we're going to continue our open discussion. Nick, we're coming back to you, and we're going to talk about cognitive agility. So, for the people who aren't IO psychologists, do you want to just start by maybe sort of giving us a bit of a definition or framing what we're going to be talking about today?
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you so much. This is kind of a revisit of an episode back in June. So it's episode 261 if you want to go back and listen to the original conversation. Dr. Emmy and Dr. Matt were taking the lead on that, and just kind of diving deeper into, I hate the term, but a really powerful soft skill for leadership as well. I think a lot of times we can forget that we are biological beings and we have a brain that has certain limitations and certain functions. Lee looks confused by that. We'll catch him up here in a bit. But yeah, so just that idea that, we are bombarded with information daily, and sorry, I'm trying to get the references in the chat as well. So I will stop multitasking, which is what people kind of think this cognitive agility is. It's being able to, switch back and forth and wear different roles, but it's not necessarily being able to do everything all at once. It's, I kind of take it to, the physical agility. You think of, kind of the sports metaphor. The agile person isn't necessarily the most powerful. It's not necessarily the person who's running people over, but they can go forward and then they can switch to left, to right, and just kind of vary their movements to get towards the goal, whatever they may be doing there as well. So it's particularly powerful when we think about, the brain that's in our heads, being able to be agile, especially with so much information coming at us so very quickly. And taking that step, what caught me about the original discussion was really thinking that it's not multitasking, it's not doing all that, it's just being deliberate about how are we going to shift focus in different situations and as different things arrive, and being more proactive instead of reactive, being able to take that pause, not necessarily go to the short circuit of the lizard brain that we have that's going to, hijack all of our things like that, but being able to say, okay, no, I'm going to stay in my higher level thought, and I'm going to deal with these challenges, more purposefully. And it is a skill that can be sharpened, and it does come with practice, all of that. So that's kind of the opening to it. I will finish getting the references into the chat as well. But Emmy, who knows much more about this than I do, looks like she's going to chime in and fill in some of the gaps for me.
Well, let's go over to Emmy.
Hello. I was so excited to see this topic resurrected. Often when we do podcasts, about 5 minutes after we get off, I'm like, I should have said this, or I should have brought this resource to the forefront. So the revisit for this month is really great concept overall. So thanks, Nick, for bringing that. One of my favorite books when I was a kid was The Thesaurus. And I really loved the thesaurus because it gave me the opportunity to really look into different words that are related. So agility, I'm going to give some of those related words to that. Interestingly enough, the first one in one of the thesauruses you'll open up will say cleverness. And I never really thought of that as a link to this dexterity, quickness, really that nimbleness, right? The actual physical agility is really kind of where this word will often get framed from. But its cousin word that I use in the workplace is the word adaptable. And what we talked about in the original episode was adaptability as a leadership superpower, to be able to move and jive and change. I talked about this with someone this week. We sometimes use this like pre-COVID, post-COVID dichotomy of the world when we talk about the world of work. But I think there's so much meat to why and discussing why. But what it did show us and demonstrate in a lot of research was the success of people who had adaptability or agility in the workplace, whether it was sending everybody home to be remote when they never had. It was keeping your teams connected, engaged to the mission and purpose in a way you never had to because you didn't have the wall to stick the mission statement on anymore physically, right? There were many, many things. Restaurants who were closed for a long period of time had to figure out sustainability. So, you saw deliveries becoming a more prevalent thing, right? Some real innovative and adaptable ways to get food to people when they couldn't sit down at a table, which really uh, became popular during the World War II period to really sit down and have food, or fast food even, when women were working in greater numbers in the workforce. And so it's such an interesting concept, but we need it more today, this concept of cognitive agility, because then it results in actual outcomes in the workplace, because things are moving rapidly, change is happening rapidly. Our digital connectivity, interestingly enough, has made us feel more disconnected than ever before. I was in a panel this morning and I heard about some recent research that really talks about the soulless nature of even our younger generation at work, that they feel like they're being used in the workplace, that they feel like they don't have connection, that they're being, sold for the purpose of the organization, but they're not invested in it, right? And so how do we make moves and changes when the world of connectivity is disconnecting us, is really a challenge that is met with adaptability and agility. And agile frameworks is something we talked about later in that month. But the purpose of it is to be able to respond to change better, to be able to meet people where they are. And I think having that agility as a superpower is not just leadership, even though that's kind of the area I talk about, the area that I'm most interested and invested in. But it is something that we can even permeate to our teams, our team members, and how they engage. And knowing that our generation that's entering the workforce is feeling more disconnected than ever. Leaders in the organization, team members who have even social influence and leadership, need to move and shift some of the practices in this new world, this post-COVID world, where people are getting their fifth boosters these days. This post-COVID, that's really still COVID world, right? We've moved and changed a lot in the workplace. How do we adapt some of these age-old practices that are in increasing numbers, making people feel disconnected and more connected to technology? I saw this outrageous number: 67% of distributed teams are feel more trusting of their AI than their teammates. That makes me heartbroken, like truly heartbroken, because I've been doing remote work forever and I love the teams that we've constructed and cultivated a culture in these teams. But it takes time and it takes agility. It takes that ability to move, shift, and drop things that aren't working way quicker than we've been doing it.
Let me go down that a little further with you, especially when it comes to that younger generation that's coming into the workforce now. What's their agility like? And, them sort of coming in going, I've seen my parents do this story for, a generation now, and look what it's done to them. So I don't want to participate. But I'm hoping that actually increases their agility, and they might even have some great ideas.
I would hope so. One of those adjectives that we can really talk about with this, the swiftness, or like being swift, is something that's kind of related to youth anyway, right? And so it's that malleability. We sometimes we'll hear from senior leaders, they want to bring in the young blood, or people that haven't been hardened by the ways of the work world yet, or by another organization's culture, right? So I think they're a really great candidate to really help us with that. But the other thing that really made me think of is oftentimes what we are promoting in the workplace of why we work is financial benefit, which equals you can buy a house to house your kids and have a retirement fund and blah, blah, blah. But those are all selfish, self-centered purposes, right? If you are not reaching the heart of people in an organization, especially young people, they are all about the purpose. They are all about the meaning and the work-life balance, and the world and the community even. I mean, the young generation cares about community and others. You'll see them out there and protest about things that are community focused or group focused. If we're promoting to them this selfish, self-centered purpose behind our work, they're not going to anchor to that. So I think they're a great resource for us to link into, and to be able to change some of the mentality of why we're even working in the first place, and hook that to the purpose that will allow us to be more nimble.
I love the fact that, we've talked for quite a while about the younger generations and them coming in, and it used to be framed in a what's wrong with them, but we're actually now starting to ask the question of, like, maybe they're right. So thank you for that, Lee. Let's pop over to you.
Well, just to build on what you just said, it's, as the saying goes, a tale as old as time. The every generation looks at the generation after them and just sort of like, what is that? You know, it's like every generation we're raising aliens. I mean, that's just what it seems like to every single generation. We do this over and over and over again. And so there's nothing new there. There's nothing unusual. There's nothing surprising. The grandparent generation looks at their grandchildren and goes, are they even speaking the same language I am? And the answer is no, they are not. So, but to go back to loop around to where I was originally trying to go is, we talk about the mental agility, which is absolutely crucial. And what we've done, though, is we tend to replace it with mental chaos. And, you look at and we can talk generational. If you look at the differences, agriculture, that generation, very focused. You gotta be. I'm going to go down this row and I'm going to plant seed after seed after seed, and then you move from that into the industrial and you get into you're making widgets on an assembly line. You're going to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. And then as we move into the information age, things start to change a bit. We start moving away from, repetitive tasks. We move into these other things, but we've gone, and in a lot of ways we've gone too far, because you look at the difference. We had people who talked on the phone, wrote letters. Then we moved to email, and then we moved to from email to text messages, and away from phone calls to text messages, away from emails to IMs, and tweets and whatever else. I have actually heard someone say that they don't like email because it's too slow. I'm not sure I understand those words, at least not in that order. So, but we're talking about and there's lots of research on social media and all the things and the shortening of the attention span. And this kind of goes back to the multitasking thing. There is no real such thing for the vast majority of us. It's a tiny, tiny, like fraction of 1% of people who can actually multitask. We're not. We're switching back and forth between tasks, and we're doing it in microseconds. So you think it's but what we tend to do is we tend to do multiple things poorly. We're not more efficient. We don't do it any faster. In fact, there's research that shows that students who attempt to multitask when they're doing their stuff actually make worse grades. They're not any more efficient. They're not doing it any better. They're not doing it any faster. They're doing worse. And we perpetuate this myth that we need to be multitasking. We need to be doing 12 things. And what we need to do is we need to step back and we need to focus on finishing something and then move on to the next something. Because doing it in sequence, you actually will complete it faster and more efficiently than you will trying to do it all at one time. Because, and those of us anybody who knows me probably knows I have ADD, because my brain bounces around like a super ball in a gym. But once I've diverted off of a thing, I'm done. I'm off. I'm over here somewhere. I'm contemplating, cat videos or something. And so to get back to the original task takes a lot longer. And so, and there are plenty of strategies you can use to focus, even for people with ADD, because, when I was a kid, it was Ritalin or a belt, basically. And my parents were like, no drugs. So I had to learn to deal. I had to learn to cope. And, and I earned every single punishment that I received, and some that I didn't actually receive that, statute of limitations is still not up on. But you have to be able to do that. And we just short circuit this stuff in the workplace right now. You're trying to do something and IMs are going off. Bing, bing, Teams, Slack, whatever. And what is the expectation? What is the expectation to respond? Is it now? Well, I have to stop what I'm doing, Are you in a meeting and you still have ping, ping, ping going on and you're expected to do that? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you call my name? Can't tell you the number of times I've heard that. Or, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? I was multitasking. You know, dude, I've just been talking to you for 15 minutes. Did you hear any of that? I don't even remember what I said at this point. So, but there are ways we can do, but we have to put that into our culture. We have to make it okay to not respond immediately. We have to take the instant out of instant messaging. We have to allow for blackout periods. I'm in a meeting. My status says I'm in a meeting. I will talk to you after the meeting. That sort of thing. A block. I only respond to email between this time and this time. We have to set those parameters because in this ever more connected world, we are more disconnected and discombobulated than ever.
Sometimes I didn't know if you were talking about an employee or one of your kids,
Yes,
which, yeah, which takes me back to maybe we need to be doing a better job raising our kids. But then again, as parents, we're multitasking raising our kids.
we
But,
are.
but can we
Well,
play a role?
and a big thing, a big problem that I think that we have is using screens for babysitters. Go to a restaurant tonight and look around and see how many kids are sitting there with $1,000 iPhone in their hand. Are you insane? Because we have research that shows what that does to their little brains on one thing, but also you handed them $1,000 iPhone. My kid threw things against walls and fell on the floor. Yeah, anyway, you go to a restaurant and you look at an entire family sitting at a table looking at their phones. I think the zombie apocalypse is here, but instead of a virus, it was caused by a smartphone.
I think we should go back to those, bring those commercials back that used to be anti-drug and go, this is your brain on Google. That might
Yeah,
help a little bit.
yeah. No, no, really. Ironically, and I love this story. There's a pub in the UK that the guy noticed everybody was looking at their phones, and he said, "This shall not stand." And so he gathered up every piece of metal and wire and everything else he could, and he basically created a Faraday cage around his bar. And it's got a sign. We got no Wi-Fi. We got no signal. Talk to each other. And he said his business was booming after that. People went there specifically because it was an old bar like it used to be. You want to talk to me? Call the bartender. I'll call my name out. Phone for Tom. You know, and he said business increased because people wanted to go there to be able to disconnect and actually talk to humans. What a concept.
Yeah, though I'm old enough to remember those days, and that person on the phone at the bar talking to the bartender was usually my mother looking for me. So,
Yeah,
pros and
there's
cons.
that. Yeah.
Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, it's fascinating conversation. To Emmy's point about the thesaurus, even just pulling up the synonyms in Word: dexterity, nimbleness, quickness, responsiveness, alertness. And we think so often agile is that go fast, break things, repair them, go 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 go. But really, when you start to get into the semantics of it, it is be present, be mindful, be deliberate in that. And to take it back to kind of the athletics, somebody's not agile by accident. They have trained, they have conditioned their responses. And so I think that's the same sort of thing with mental training. When we talk about, these soft skills, these communication challenges that we have, we do have to remember that it does come with some training and some intention. And, to Lee's point about, an over reliance on technology and wanting some of that, connection. I don't want to turn it into a complete social commentary, but, yeah, parenting has something to do with it. Everybody wants to say, that I remember millennials broke this, millennials broke that. Yeah, we're 40 now. We're done breaking things. But also, like, we're your kids. Like, there's a reason that some of this happens. Hold on a minute, buddy. Speaking of, screens babysitting at the moment. But even to that point, there's these kind of shifts back and forth. Ironically enough, my wife started corresponding with a pen pal. Like, she physically writing letters because she wanted that connection, that time for her to slow down and deliberately put her thoughts on paper and get to know somebody. And I think that you'll see some of this. Yes, it feels archaic and all of that, but I mean, the research shows even if you go on a camping trip and you get your circadian rhythm back in line with what the sun is doing, how much that, adapts your cognitive abilities and things like that. It is connected there. And I think, being deliberate to disconnect, to say, I'm going to talk to you, or, and Lee's point about kind of attention strategies, it's energy management, it's attention management, because you do have to be aware of so many things in the modern world. We take driving where when you first learn how to drive, you have to focus on so many things. But as you get used to it, you get that kind of extra sense of, I know how far out the front bumper is, just intuitively, and things like that. And so it does become more automatic. So, yeah, I think that there is definitely something to say about intention, as far as some of these things go. And good leadership, good communication has to be bound up in that. And we always scoff at, are we talking about employees or are we talking about kids? But, you are developing another person. And so the similarities are there. And, whether we're talking about organizations, individuals, or families, these skills cross over and touch so many things. So if you get it right in one arena, the hope is that you will get it right, at least partially, in another, but you're in a different context and you may behave differently as well.
Do we need to teach people how to focus? I mean, one another thing that great athletes have is tremendous focus, but we live in a world where if you can't focus, we can give you a drug for that. And shouldn't we be looking at people and their ability? I mean, journaling is a great way to focus. So, do you think we're losing the ability to focus in this hectic world?
I don't think it's a priority as much. I think we have pushed so far to production, results, and all of this. Like, we forget that process is important. I mean, we have a calculator in our pocket, which my high school math teacher told me was never going to happen. But I would still say the value of knowing what that tool can do is immense. You see all these Facebook posts where the order of operations gets out of whack, and one generation thinks the answer is A, the other thinks it's B. But until you go through kind of the logic of it and understand the underlying concepts, I think that's valuable knowledge to have. And if we think about the process, whether that's education or physical fitness or anything like that, you have to go through it, and it's hard to remember what it was like as a novice when you've become an expert. The burden of knowledge is real, and you just can't comprehend that somebody doesn't know what they're doing. And I would hope that social commentary, whatever, we would stop being so focused on results and start being more focused on people. And instead of saying, "Oh, they're not producing," be curious and saying, "What's going on?" Really taking that empathetic step to say, "Let me try and get in their brain and see it from their point of view." Probably not going to get it perfect, but a people first approach, I think, gets us back to that connection that we're lacking. And yeah, it would be a better world. But it's going, again, to take intention and deliberateness. If we're going to change the systems, we have to change the people, and we have to communicate. It all comes back full circle.
There you go. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Emmy. Back to you.
Thanks, Nick, for that great lead-in, because I was going to talk about human-centric, and he said people first, which is the synonym. So thanks, Nick, for that. I wanted to kind of talk about that with the overlay of cognitive agility. So because it is the ability to shift perspectives based on multiple inputs. What are those inputs, right? They are emotions, they are values, context, people, diverse thought, right, that you have on an organization or maybe within a team. And so being able to take that reflection, receive inputs, and shift your opinions, shift your thoughts, shift the way you're doing things really results in is a move from narrow problem solving to a more holistic or wider problem solving abilities. So cognitive agility will equal that. Then also the whole person experience, engaging the whole person, engaging the emotions, the empathy engages the care about others. Moral reasoning is involved in that, right? Awareness, embodying awareness of others, and not just our own narrow thinking there. So that really speaks to that people first, human centric sort of mentality and methodology that you can have when you're being more nimble, or let's pick any of these other synonyms, but at the core, it's the agility that we're really exhibiting there. And then what that will ultimately lead to is also then cultivating that environment of connection, right? That environment of collaboration. That is something that's really critical to me. I've been working remotely, digitally mediated for over 15 years. And I have seen time and time again that it is possible to feel true connections with your coworkers, with your teams, with your purpose across digital mediums. But it does take that intentionality. And we talk a little bit about that focus on the people itself. I mean, I very much take practical steps to do that in my children's lives, because I very much have noticed, and I've sorry strangers out there that I've taken the photos of, but you'll see a family at a table in a restaurant and they're all on their phones, and I'm like, a quick picture of that, just so I can maybe make a montage one day of all the times I have seen this in restaurants. It's really interesting. We put our phones away at home. We do dinners at the table every night, zero phones, zero TV on, nothing on. And they hate that I make them turn their phones in at 7 p.m. That was an early time for a teenager to be putting their phone on a charging port that is within my eyesight. And they are really, really, they've even said, "Oh, Mom, no one else does this." And I'm like, actually, ask my women's group at church. We all decided we were going to do it together and support each other in it. So all of our kids, there's at least 10, okay? There's at least 10 doing it out there in the world. So not just the one, but it actually has created even connection with each other. They have made games like hallway baseball be a thing. Now, I don't love hallway baseball as a mom, but I let it be, right? I let it be. We have a balloon that they'll blow up and toss around. I mean, these are teenagers, right? Doing things like that. They'll go outside and ride their bike, or they'll make up games with each other. There's a trivia card game. How well do you know your family? They're getting to know each other. These are the things that the connection has allowed them to do, but they're also building that empathy. They're able to shift their minds a little bit. They're able to hear the other person in this. Now, I mean, they're also teens, and so sometimes it's headbutting, right? Sometimes it's the normal teen behavior. But I have loved watching what the connection that they have done for them overall as little humans, right? That are growing into full-size humans these days. But that to me has shown the agility that they have. They've changed opinions on things. They've been able to help each other shift their kind of self-focused mindset in a moment. One of them might fall outside and they're shifting from their playing to going in to help someone, right? And they're not glued into this device. So I think there's a lot of benefits to that agility, but the biggest ultimate benefit, I think, is that connection and trust that you can build. And for organizations, because I know leaders care about that, you're able to innovate more effectively when you've got collaboration happening. So I'll throw that out there for those who are more business focused and in their mindset. There is an outcome for you too.
There we go. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Kim, good to see you as always. Let's go to you.
Hi, good afternoon. So some great buzzwords popping up here, and I love it. Empathy was one that I was going to jump on like instantly, because as leaders, we need to be able to do that switch back and forth between being empathetic and being critical thinkers. And it comes in the moment what we're dealing with. And sometimes you have to be more firm as a leader. Sometimes you have to be more sympathetic, sometimes more empathetic, and it comes along in there. Soft skills and cognitive agility, they're interconnected, and I've heard so many great, like I said, great buzzwords coming out of this conversation, being adaptable, being flexible, the problem solving, the critical thinking, and decision making. Things like this, I feel, are right now generationally they're declining. We've got AI in the classrooms, things like that. We're worried about critical thinking being weeded out a little bit, things along that line. Emmy, I love it. If I took my granddaughter's cell phone away right now at 7:00, she'd probably first day have a fit. But it's a good tool, right? So but I agree with Nick. We got a calculator right in our pocket, but we're still missing some of that. So I think the soft skills aspect of it with the agility, we bounce back and forth between soft skills. We show up and the communication's important and the dependability is important, and it's just, they're missing the collaboration piece to some aspect. There's just so many components of soft skills right now that I think as leaders, we need to continue to push the mental agility, the cognitive agility in that soft skills component, because that's kind of what they're getting. They're going to be able to do that switching from task to task. I think that is something that grows with age. You learn to do that. And yes, when they're younger, they seem to be able to take things on. But I think that the soft skills part of it is starting to change.
I've noticed now that there's books on critical thinking. Like people are actually writing books about how to become a critical thinker. How did we lose that, and how do we get it back?
That's a great question. I really wish I had an answer for that. I think the technology sphere that we have now, we've got some great tools. The internet's out there, and we all were at first like, everything's open to us. We could investigate everything. But as it's gone on, it also made it, there was a decline to where everything was so instant at our fingertips that it became a shortcut tool, not a help us, it did it for us. And how to get that back, that's something, in the academic sphere we're challenged with right now, is maintaining that. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges we're still dealing with. So I think things like, getting people to read yet on a regular, read, not a headline, not the shortcut version of something, getting back to some of those fundamentals and going through things, having good conversations with people and interacting on the personal basis. Those things they're very relevant. They need to happen.
Yeah, my girls would read for fun when they were kids. Now that they're adults, I don't think they read for fun anymore. So thank you very much. Great thoughts. Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, I think that there's we've tripped into a bigger sort of societal trend, and it's absolutely relevant. It is that sort of anthropological, sociological sort of thing. I was just listening. I'm a proud library card holder. Hoopla is a great app, free books. One of them that I'm listening to is the top 10 articles from 2024 in the Harvard Business Review. And they talked about generational differences. And they kind of took the approach of make it part of your DEI strategy because there are real differences. But at the same time, are they overblown to some degree? And when you institute a policy that you say, well, this is for, Gen Z or Gen Alpha or millennials, you find that everybody's in favor of, better workplace flexibility, that there is sort of a universal sort of thing. So when you just try to put it through one lens, yeah, you can, say that this, and this, but at the same time, there's a human element to why the reactions are there. And, it's funny, we talk about how these things have kind of shifted and, we're hunched over our phones and we're losing some of those, verbal, nonverbal cues, when we're talking through a screen. The beautiful part is the brain is so super plastic that we can rewire it fairly quickly. I mentioned getting back to, circadian rhythms and getting back to basics, as it were, but that can be a hard reset for your biology and your mentality. And I think that when you do have that intention to change a habit, you can get things to wire differently. And that's, I think, part of why the agility is so apt, because the mental flexibility that we have in the structures of things can come through, in behaviors and things like that as well. Going back to something that Lee said, we talk about those things to shortcut, because every decision you have to make takes a little bit out of the tank throughout the day. I think in the original conversation, Tom, you said something about, getting interrupted by a meeting and then having to go back to paperwork. I don't want to do paperwork. So just to drum up that motivation a second time to do the work again, that does, take take a toll. So the more you can, limit the distractions or set yourself up for success. I've gotten in the habit lately, back in the gym finally, and packing my bag the night before does wonders. It's autopilot. You don't have to worry about it, but you do have to come up with that strategy to make things automatic. So turning off notifications, deliberately putting your phone away at 7 o'clock. There's these things that can happen, but you have to see the problem, understand it, make a choice to solve it, and then go through with the action plan as well. And I think that resonates very well on an individual level. And when we translate it up to an organization, then it's, how do we live our mission statement? Well, you've got to put it in the DNA of the whole organization. It's not just up on the wall. It's how we conduct phone calls. It's how we conduct meetings. So often we talk about getting sort of cohesion in an organization, and it is through those little choices made over and over and over. How do we hire? How do we fire? How do we interact? When do we call a meeting? And you can't sit there and think about those all the time because work has to get done. But once you've created the environment for the work to happen, the hope is that you can maintain it to a degree, but you are going to have to stop and examine it and really think about what's going on and what the motivation is.
How much work is this? Because, I imagine a lot of people would be listening and going, oh, wow, it sounds great, but it sounds like a lot of work. But is it truly a lot of work to, boost your cognitive agility?
I mean, it's practice, it's reps, it's getting those paths to go together. And I think there's a ton of upfront work. There's a ton of having to steer the ship. You've got to make the choice, you've got to make the plan, and then you've got to keep with it. There's an element of consistency that's there, and so the upfront work is, I think, the barrier for a lot of things. But if you can kind of hold, well, what's the vision, what's the picture at the end of the road? If I can, limit distraction, what does that look like down the road? And so, something from my graduate program was, you start the experiment, when you're describing a construct, begin with the end in mind. Like, what is it you're actually looking for? What are we trying to measure? What does that truly look like? Okay, now let's work backwards on how we get there. And so, yes, it's a lot of work, and all the good things require hard work. I mean, you, you don't accidentally end up investing in people. It's not an accident. Yeah, sometimes you get lucky and it's easier, but to maintain and be day in and day out and play more of a sort of long scale lifetime rather than just what is it this quarter. I think that goes back to the social commentary of where's our focus. Are we focused on the quarterly earnings? Are we focused on the mission of the organization? Are we focused on the widgets we produce or the impact we have on the community? Both things can be true at the same time, but it does take some effort, and a lot of times IO psychology comes off as researched common sense. Once you see it, it's so obvious. But if you're intentional and you're trying to be a good person in what you're doing, good things are going to happen. Is kind of the correlation there. And so it just to answer your question, the upfront work is brutal and it takes a lot, and it could be self-examination, it could be any number of things. But once you get past that barrier, well, why didn't I do this sooner? Is always sort of the thing when you make an improvement yourself, and I think that the same thing scales at organizational levels.
We've both worked in the restaurant world, and cognitive agility, man. All you need is like one good lunch rush to understand. But can you give us some real world experience that you've had where cognitive agility has saved you?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think that service
Every day.
industry and hospitality, you are multitasking, running multiple tables, keeping things in mind and having to be like, okay, where was this process at, and jumping and switching so often, and you have to do it with a smile and deal with people who are hungry and maybe not at their best. But yeah, I think that I always joke that you can't really train servers to deal with when everything collapses. You just have to kind of let them go and let the world fall down around them and see how they get back up. And it's a terrible training tool. It's not efficient, but that's, again, they've got to go through that process. You can't, I mean, you could warn somebody of the mistakes that you've made, but you can't tell them what it, exactly what it felt like. They're going to have to try it on for size and say, I don't like that. I'm going to do it this way. And so it just, yeah, that constant switching in the service industry. And yeah, it has helped for me, at least. You move on quicker. I've done it long enough that one bad tip does not make my entire shift, does not make my entire month. You can kind of put things in their proper context of, well, that was one table, that was one guest, and then look for the larger patterns over time.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Kim, back to you.
Yeah, something as far as improving cognitive agility, you have to kind of get back to like Nick was saying, those basics, the emotional intelligence elements. You have to start with your self-awareness, your self-regulation. You have to get back to knowing yourself, and you have to go out and actually seek those diverse perspectives. Something I tell my students, you have to do that Teflon Velcro effect. Don't get your confirmation bias in check. Just anything that you seek is going to be confirmation of what you want to hear, so it sticks to you like Velcro. And then what you don't want to hear, it slides right off of you like Teflon, right? So you have to look for those different perspectives that don't necessarily agree with you. You have to play devil's advocate with yourself. You have to reframe problems. You have to you have to give yourself some mental flexibility. You can't just sit there in a stagnant position. You have to put yourself into a uncomfortable position to be able to figure it back out.
Well, maybe you can give me some help with this, because I'm assuming I may be like a lot of people, but the constant battle between my emotional brain and my logical brain when I'm trying to make a decision, especially when it comes to things like critical thinking. And I constantly find myself in, well, I know I should, but I don't really want to. So any advice on how to deal with that?
Keep thinking. It's the difference between your head and your heart, right? You that gut feeling. There's a lot that goes into it. You just have to give it time, sort things out. You weigh the pros and cons. There's a lot of methods that you can go through. Don't try to solve it by yourself. Seek out other people. Bounce things off of other people. There's just, write things out. Do the journaling that was recommended earlier. Get things out on the table. Give it some time. Things along that line. There's a lot of tools that are out there to help with this, and to train yourself into getting better at it. Don't make the hasty decision. I was guilty of that for a very, very long time. And just take things slow, weigh them out. And you know what? If it doesn't feel good, don't do it. That's probably the best advice I could give. If it feels wrong, it's probably wrong. So that's probably where I would go.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Lee, let's go back to you.
Well, one thing that I've noticed that I deal with sometimes is the analysis paralysis. Too many things going on, and you're like, I just can't make a decision. And so sometimes you gotta, sometimes you have to get some input, and sometimes it's not the input that you want, but that makes it even more important because, and to Dr. Kim's point, if your gut's telling you something, you should probably listen. Should you make decisions based on intuition? By and large, no. But the gut check is an important part of the process as you go through and you do your fact checking. But you want to increase mental agility? Well, there are ways that you can do that, both within yourself and within a team. There are you can role play, you can gamification. How do you get better at it? By doing it. And you can read a book, great. You can watch a YouTube thing, cool. But the way you're going to actually get better at it is by doing it. And there are things that you can do, team building exercises, whatever else, to, decision making. There's escape rooms and whatever things that you can do, some fun things that make you actually engage that part of your brain. And there's a lot of ironically, there's talking about our electronics, there are games on your electronics that will allow you to do strategy and to do, having to make decisions before the big bad ugly boss, hits you with a hammer, whatever the game is. But that's how it's just like, how do you get in better shape? Do you sit there and think, wow, I really should get into better shape? No, you get out and you go walking, or you go lift something heavy, or something. You get better by doing. And it's the same thing here. And it's both, you could do it personally and you could do it within your teams. And a really, really sage piece of advice that I got from one of my longtime mentors is, doesn't so much matter what you decide. It's what you decide about what you decided.
Mm.
How do you feel about it? You made the decision. How do you feel about it? The after action, thing, whatever, hot wash, as we call the military. The figuring that out. Sometimes we got to make decisions we don't want to make. Yeah, it's part of being an adult, which was one of the first mistakes I've ever made. I mean, that's a bad decision, being an adult. I mean, kids are tricked, man. I'm telling you. But when you make that decision, it's important to revisit. Don't lament. Don't walk backwards looking into the past. But it is important to give yourself, give yourself some grace if it didn't work out. We learn from failure. We celebrate success. So that's important, to give yourself that grace and to give yourself permission. Okay, I screwed up. Maybe I shouldn't do that again. Okay. And I would stay away from the absolutes, like I should do this. Why? What is making that decision? So examine that. And the same mentor said another thing is the difference between willpower and want power. You have all the willpower in the world. If you don't want to, you won't. If you want, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. So just be honest with yourself. If you don't want to do it, don't waste the mental energy on it. Because you're going to waste time. You're spinning your wheels. You're going to ultimately fail because you're just not going to do it. So there you go.
Thank you very much for that. Nick, let's go back to you.
Yeah, I think to something you said earlier, how do we fix the attention span sort of thing? Well, we've been trying to do it for thousands of years. Look back at the original philosophers. We think about how we think, and then we think some more about it and things like that. So it's not a new phenomenon by any stretch of the imagination. But we've got to revisit some of the answers that have been provided, and we've got to frame it in our current context as well. And I think to kind of Lee's point as well, that intention, that motivation. I mean, there's books and books and books on motivation and how to motivate yourself and time management and all these things. There's strategies, there's gimmicks, and you can read all the books that you want, and I'm guilty of it as well. But if you don't take that knowledge and apply it, then you just stared at a dead tree for 45 minutes, and that's kind of the sum total of it. We can prove that. Go to your local bookstore and go look at the self-help section. We are fantastically complex human beings, and there are some simple things. You can understand how your brain is wired, but if you can't set yourself up to change those things, the habits aren't going to change. And we get very much locked into this prisoner of the moment, instant gratification culture. And if we can take a step back, take a pause, take a deep breath, and really just kind of look at the whole situation and say, okay, well, that attempt didn't work out so great. What do we need to change for the next iteration? And I think that's learning from failure is huge, and just accepting it. And I think that's kind of the core of psychological safety, is freeing people up to be able to fail without getting screamed at or creating those traumatic moments. Again, we get down the parenting rabbit hole there as well, with how does leadership guide and things like that as well. So it's a fascinating starting point that leads into so many other parts of psychology, particularly IO psychology. And if you can figure out what motivates people, you can do it. And I think that's one of the struggles of technology, is really smart people have designed it to be ergonomic, to be attention getting, and they're using your own mechanics against you at times. And even when you see it, you can't help it, but the bug zapper, they see the light and they go to the light, sort of thing. And even more so, we think about just having that awareness and that flexibility as technology gets better and better. You see all these animal videos that were generated with AI that look real, but there is something in your brain that goes, "That's not quite right." And how do we articulate that? And how do we teach what that looks like in a business context, in an educational context, and what parts of the system are there and we need to keep strong, and what parts of the system do we need to revisit and change based on where we're at today.
Let me ask you a question about, and I'll put this to the whole panel. When it comes to that cognitive agility, in in theater, we have a term, "kill the baby," and it's when a bunch of actors are working together. We're working on a collective. We're all throwing ideas out, and you've got this fabulous idea that's just not going to work, and you have to let it go. And I imagine there are business leaders all over who they know that this is the wrong direction to go, but they just can't let it go. So how do you let go of these things? How do you use that agility to let go?
Welcome to the human condition. I think you get attached to an idea and you want to see it through. And I think that the collaborative piece that you talk about, in theater, I can have a great idea in my head and run with it. But I could be delusional. I think I'm great, and I will make every excuse in the book and under the sun to let me get away with what I want to do. But we do need that sort of check, like, hey, you can't be an NFL quarterback. You're already past 40 and you haven't played a down of football in your life. Like, you have to let some of those dreams go and accept the constraints that are there. And a lot of times you don't necessarily see the constraints until you have somebody else tell you or take somebody else's perspective for it.
Yeah, but I'm working with people who go, but I can play a quarterback on TV. There you go. Thank you very much for that. Heather, always good to see you. Let's go to you.
Hi. Thank you. So there was, I don't know if it was you, Tom, or maybe it was you, Nick, talking about how to increase attention span and all that fun stuff. And maybe we don't have to try and find that magic cure, but maybe we just need to learn to adapt to it because I mean, our technology is kind of here to stay. And maybe we just need to lean into, I mean, it is what it is right now. And we leverage the strengths that we do have. And like for me, I know that if I have TikTok on my phone, I get sucked into it and it's bad. So I have a Bloom card that I swipe on my phone and it locks me out until I swipe it again. And so, do I delete TikTok from my phone? No. But I swipe it in the morning and I don't give it to myself again till the end of the day. So I get all my work done. And so I don't like refrain from having it on my phone, but I swipe it in the morning, I get my work done, and I use that Pomodoro technique where you do like the 20-minute increments and then I give myself a break. And usually during my break, if I want to watch my 5 minutes of TikTok or I want to do something, like I'll do that, but you have to be dedicated to actually get off. And so an eye-opening experience was looking at my screen time app on my iPhone. That was fun. That's really eye-opening. And so like being honest with yourself, looking at what you're actually spending your time on. And I'm a big list person. And so at any given point of the day, you can look at my lists and what I'm doing and I check it off. And so I have an Apple iPhone and a MacBook and an iPad. And so they all sync up. And so at any point I can check something off the list and then I can see what's gone for the rest of the day, like what I have to do. And so it keeps me and I can move stuff around. So it's being able to be agile. I can adapt to it if I need to. But I mean that works for me. It might not work for everyone, but
Well, let me ask you this, and once again, I'll put this to the whole panel because
Yeah.
My director producer brain goes, you know what? You're right. People don't have a problem focusing on TikTok. Like it just sucks us right in. So, are there lessons that I can be learning on what TikTok is doing to get people to focus on what I want them to focus on?
Mm,
Is there something sneaky and devious that I can use to better my position?
are you gonna sneak learning videos into the
Well, maybe if learning videos were as good as TikTok videos.
right? I mean, good luck.
Well, maybe there's a new book to be written there somewhere about how to use these new discoveries we're making with how intelligence, our computers are just sucking people in, and I'm seeing more and more of, geez, if the computer will think for me, I don't need to think. And it is frightening the heck out of me. Nick, let's go back to you, and we should probably be wrapping this up soon. But I just want to take us back into the loop of, oh my God, what is technology doing to us? Is it positive or is it negative? But once again, I remember 20 years ago coaching people to do speaking engagements, and the Q&A session was always the big fear for a lot of people because they had to be quick on their feet. They had to have critical thinking abilities, and that cognitive agility really plays into that well. So, how do we save the world? How do we bring things back, or can we?
I mean, I will go to the standard IO answer. It depends. Because, different situations, different contexts, different constraints require different tools. And so, Dr. Morton talks about, I have to set the boundaries for myself so that I don't let the distraction become a distraction when it doesn't need to be. But it doesn't make that thing, that distraction, completely terrible. It just means, okay, I can't do it right now. That's for later. That's delayed gratification, which is a hard thing in modern culture as well. I will say your idea of how can we get technology under control. We are going to revisit, the gift that keeps on giving this year, which is AI and how it impacts the workplace. We had an open discussion a little while ago, and it's been a very prevalent topic. So we will revisit that specifically next week, as by way of a preview there. But I mean, you're talking about how do we use these tools to get people to do what I want them to do? Well, I mean, that's influence, that's persuasion. There's a ton of books already written on that. Do they apply the specific tools that we have today? Not yet, but a lot of times people don't necessarily know what they don't know, and that's why you as a director can tell the actor, hey, try it this way, and put that slight reframe into it, and they can either go, well, that's dumb, and I'm not going to listen to you, or they can say, wow, that does bring out that performance. And even to kind of put it in the theater, we have movies, but there's still stage shows going on. We have all of these things. They didn't necessarily go away. The focus is on the new cutting edge thing, but you can go back, again, revisiting something like a pen pal or this, that, and the other. And when you stop and really think about it, you have to set your intention. You have to set what you want to do with the tools that are out there. And if you want to set somebody else's intention, then yes, you have to understand, how the brain works, how messaging works, how communication does, and get to all these soft skills and hold them all in your brain at once, and then let them go when they're not working. And it is that shift and that sort of understanding. It's not easy, and there's added layers. Like I've never met Tom in person, but I have a good idea of who he is and how he feels about me based on kind of that consistency of being here. So it's not to say that it's good, bad, or otherwise. It is different. But the biology, the neuroscience, all of that, understanding that and understanding how we work is kind of the key, in my opinion, on how we, look to solve these problems as well. So it's fascinating. I'm so glad to revisit this topic. I didn't get to be part of the original conversation, so to be able to pick up and get all of that. I'm thankful that Dr. Emmy was here to fill in some of the gaps as well. But it's been a fantastic conversation, very exciting, as always goes in directions we never thought it would spider into. But with that, are there any announcements that you have for us, Tom?
No, just that we will be back next week with an open discussion of Beyond the Hype, redefining work in the age of intelligence. I'll try and bring some intelligence with me next week, although I'm getting close to the opening of A Christmas Carol, so my brain could be a little bit scattered next week. But thank you very much, Nick, for leading us down the memory lane as we take a look back at some of our previous episodes and continuing this conversation today. Thank you for everyone who contributed today. And remember, if you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome. It's a free ticket. Just go to the CBOC website, register, and join us and share your voice. And with that, Nick, if you want to count us out, we'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time.
Thank you so much, Tom. Have a great week, and we'll see you count out in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.